Welcome back to Secret Weapons. My name is Mark Johnston. If this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for level up your writing, your playing, and your production from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a studio. If that's the kind of thing that would appeal to you, please hit the subscribe button and stick around for future videos. Today, we're taking a look at the electronic audio experiments Greathammer Bass Overdrive. So every so often on the channel, there comes a piece of gear that I have to kind of reveal at the top of a video that I have been secretly using for some time. Often a piece of gear comes in and it sits in its box nearby in the studio so I can pull it out and get to know it kind of over the course of time in niche applications before I make a video on it. But the Greathammer came out of the box a couple months ago and went directly onto my bass pedal board, and it has not moved from there until today when I took it off to put it on my guitar board to make the intro track for this video. In fact, the reason it went straight onto that bass board is because before this was here, I had the EAE glaive sitting in its spot. And this does feel very much like the bass-focused spiritual successor to the glaive. You can still get the glaive. It's not really successive. They're just kind of things that both exist. One optimized for guitar, in my opinion, and one optimized much more for bass, which is this one. So let's talk about what's going on in the Greathammer. You have level and gain with, I believe, up to 50 decibels of gain on tap in this pedal. You have a bass control, which is post clipping, which is important because it means that when boosting or cutting bass, you are changing the shape of the waveform and the audio going into the clipping. And if you push bass up, you will distort more of your bass in that clipping. If you cut it back down, you will clip less bass going in. This is post clipping, post dirt in this pedal, which means your signal hits the clipping in the Greathammer, and then you can boost or cut the bass of that clipped signal cleanly in this device, basically giving you access to more bass on tap without distorting the bass more, or less bass on tap without kind of killing the overall amount of gain in the signal. On the other side, you have an attack control, and conversely, that attack control is going to be ahead of the clipping stage in the Greathammer, and this is going to kind of modulate and adjust frequencies at and above 1 kilohertz, basically so that you can kind of adjust your pick attack. It will also have some knock-on consequences, like pushing attack higher will create more high-end distortion in the pedal because, once again, you are controlling how much of your high frequencies go into the clipping stage. But on bass, that basically allows you to dial in or out that kind of sharp pick attack sound on bass. On guitars, it is kind of woollying things up when cutting and creating a very angular, bright attack on your guitar when boosting. In this particular studio where I am recording today with a Bad Cat, Hot Cat, a 50-watt tube amplifier, pushing that attack up high means feeding back quite a bit when standing near the amplifier, which can be very, very appealing or can be something of a trouble spot. And so far, all 4 of these control parameters are pretty friendly on bass and guitar. I like post-clipping bass controls in a lot of overdrive pedals. Benson's first ever pedal, the Benson preamp, had a similar kind of topology to its distortion circuit, and I really liked that about that device. And it is a welcome inclusion on guitar, and it is what I think is pretty necessary inclusion on bass. That attack control is going to be more friendly on your bass, but is going to still give you some interesting control and some interesting textural control on guitar. But in the center position, you have a little 3-position toggle right here, and that is going to be what I think is the most bass-focused side of this pedal for me. And that's because that is a pretty aggressive notch filter that is ahead of everything else in this device. This is ahead of your attack, it's ahead of your clipping, and it's ahead of your bass. And in the top position, you get a flat response, which I think sounds incredible on guitar. The notch filtering is pretty extreme on guitar and pretty musical and intentional on bass. But in that flat position, this is a goddamn beast on guitars. When you drop it to the middle position, you go into intense notch filtering, which is going to be a negative 15 dB cut at 750 hertz. So kind of a low midsy notching out of frequencies. It's pretty extreme and can create a lot of clarity on bass, but can create something of a Metal Zone meme style lack of mid-range on guitars. And in the bottom position, you have a more gentle notched out frequency at about 1 kilohertz, at about -12 dB. So not quite as extreme and not as dramatic of a cut in terms of like important frequencies on bass. But again, they have their places if you want certain kind of grindy guitar tones, genres that I probably don't swim enough in for kind of grind and death metal and that kind of stuff. There's probably some real strong applications for both of those clipping sounds in this on guitars, maybe extended range guitars, that kind of thing. But for me, playing as far down as D standard in this video, they're not really for me, but that up position, just set and forget on guitar, in my opinion, and you are off to the races. But those other two sounds are really killer on bass. That flat can be great on bass with your gain set low, but as you start to push more gain through this pedal, things can get pretty kind of brick as a waveform goes on bass, and those notch filters create a ton of space and musicality. So we're going to go ahead and take a brief kind of detour on this device with guitars using that Music Man Fluff signature Stingray. And then we're going to do the kind of heavy work, which is taking a look at the Greathammer on what is really my favorite instrument anyways, the bass guitar. So let's go ahead and start things off by taking a brief foray into the Greathammer on guitar. I want to spend more time and focus in this video on bass because that's what it is kind of designed for and where I think it truly excels, but it does have some great sounds on guitar, as evidenced by the fact that we used it on all the guitars in that intro track. For these sound samples, we're going to go ahead and use my Music Man Fluff signature Stingray, the one that just has that single humbucker in the bridge position, into the Greathammer and into the Bad Cat Mod Shop Hot Cat in the more Marshall voice of the two. So our clean tone, because of the nature of what this guitar is going to be kind of pretty close to, if not slightly over the edge of breakup as it is. And we'll give a listen to the Greathammer in that context. So the control scheme in the Greathammer is pretty straightforward. You have your volume and gain at the top. You have a bass control, which is going to be a post-clipping bass response, which basically means the bass is either boosted or cut after the distortion circuit in the Greathammer. The attack control is going to adjust frequencies above 1 kilohertz, basically allowing you to kind of dial in or out pick attack and overall clarity of your signal. Again, this is a very bass-friendly device. And in the center position, you have a notched mid-range control. The up position is flat, which for my money is my favorite position in this for guitar. The middle position is a 15 decibel cut at 750 hertz, and the down position is an 11 decibel cut at 1 kilohertz. So that's going to cut out a smaller amount, whereas the middle position is going to be the most kind of mid-scoopy, aggressive notch filter. Let's go ahead and play with that gain control, and then we'll start taking a look at some of those EQ controls. Let's go ahead and take a look at that boost control and that attack control, so you can kind of hear how you can kind of increase or decrease your pick attack clarity, as well as a kind of post gain low end control or exaggeration. And like I said, this center control feels very optimized for bass. So as we kind of step from that top position flat into that middle position, strong 750 hertz cut, you're going to get a very mid-scoopy sound on guitar. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Greathammer on bass. I am using my Jennings short scale bass as I did in that intro track, and this is a bass that I've always struggled to get a lot of like grit and like aggression out of, and so there's a reason the Greathammer has been living on my baseboard for the past couple of months. So let's go ahead and use this directly into the unit and into the Greathammer, running into the Soyuz Lakeside preamp direct input, and then basically using a Universal Audio SVT emulation plugin in Pro Tools as our amplifier. This is what our clean tone sounds like, just bass directly into that SVT emulation. And because we kind of talked through the control parameters in that guitar section, we're going to go ahead and just kind of turn knobs and explore the Greathammer on bass. So let's go ahead and kind of take this kind of gritty but somewhat boxy sounding bass sound and start building it out. We'll shelf and boost that low end, and we'll play with the attack to kind of set the pick attack as more or less in front of our sound. And then we'll kind of take a look at that mid control to kind of notch out some troublesome frequencies when pushing a lot of drive into a bass amp. tone might not sound super gainy, but let's compare it to our bypass tone.